Thanks everyone for attending this session. The topic that we want to discuss today is not necessarily the simplest one. Maybe it's not the one that you usually want to have after a very lovely lunch break. But let's face it, it's going to be one of the most important topics that is going to reshape how we do AI, how we think about data, how we do analytics in the next few years. And this is what I want to unpack today. Before we go into that, just as a brief introduction, at Dataiku, we started working on AI governance a good 5 years ago. And the results are that today you have a lot of capabilities that are built into our product. We have an extended module that is called Dataiku Govern. We have dedicated team working on this. But let's face it, when we started working on that 5 years ago, it's not as if there was a crying demand for that governance topic. There were bumbling needs coming from having a bit of sign-off here and there for MLOps practices. We were seeing some customers starting to have proper processes in place, most of them coming from regulatory backgrounds. And there was demand for responsible AI. Today, this landscape is completely shifting because regulation is starting to come up, because the EU is editing the EU AI Act, and we can take the firm assumption that we are penetrating an age that I like to call the age of regulated AI. And that this is, again, going to deeply change how we apprehend AI on a day-to-day basis. Fortunately, you will not hear about this from me, because I'm not the right expert for that. I'm very pleased to welcome 3 panelists who know this topic inside out and know also a lot about what it means to implement those types of regulations inside different organizations. And as I don't want to butcher your names, I will actually make sure that you have an opportunity to present yourselves. So who wants to go first? Amanda?
I'll go first. Hi, everyone. Really delighted to be here. I'm Amanda Catherine. I'm at PwC. I've always been very interested in the intersection of law and data science. I studied law and data science, which was always weird, but now it's wonderful.
Brilliant. Hi, I'm Fabrice. I'm a director of AI at PwC, and I look after the responsible AI agenda.
Barry Smith. I'm an independent consultant working now mainly in responsible AI. I moved from being a poacher, so being a head of data science at a large UK bank, to being a consultant with clients trying to implement responsible AI and to comply with this act.
Perfect transition on that. Amanda, what is this act about? Can you try to summarize it for us? And it's going to be difficult. Usually we have slides for this, so please bear with us.
So I've come up with 10 different summaries, and I keep fine-tuning them, which I'm sure the audience can relate to. But when I was thinking of how to best define it, I would say it's a very comprehensive regulatory framework aimed at ensuring the safe and ethical deployment of AI systems. Really important to focus on AI systems because the Act does not actually define AI, but it defines AI systems. The reason why the Act is both unique and I would say groundbreaking is it's one of the first very comprehensive regulations for foundation models that we all know and love. When you first think of the law LLM, you think, oh, a master's in law, but now the real LLMs are large language models, and the regulation is very comprehensive based on risk tiers. So when you think about GDPR, you think about the different levels and what highly sensitive data is and how they have different protections. With the EU AI Act, there's unacceptable risk, there's high risk. So high risk would be, say, HR systems. There's limited risk, so I'm sure we've all used chatbots. So chatbots are considered the limited risk, and they have a transparency requirement. And then we have the minimal risks, where is the rest of the bucket. But the reason why the legislation is considered groundbreaking is because there are fines for lack of compliance. So this can be up to a percentage of global turnover. 7% of global turnover, or up to 35 million euros, whichever is higher, which is quite a lot of money and a great incentive to practice ethical AI and to start looking at how to ensure that companies comply.
So this is a new regulation, and when was it signed again? It was last summer, right?
Yeah, so this summer. This summer, but the first actual compliance deadlines start in February of next year. So probably a good idea to work with the lawyers and developers.
So actually, it's a good transition to that. Barry, you've been working with different types of companies for a long time, and notably financial services companies. What do you feel is the level, I would say, of readiness and of anxiety that is tied to the EAI Act today? And also, do you see a difference between sectors depending upon their regulatory habits, I would say?
Well, let's start with the readiness and anxiety factors. I think for most of the clients I work with, and that's mainly in the financial services sector, it's to do with uncertainty about what the Act means. There are many terms in the Act which are not very clear. In fact, the key term is AI system. And today, Alex Voss sent a letter, formal letter, to the European Commission. Alex Voss was the lead parliamentary negotiator on the text of the Act. He sent a letter to the European Commission saying, come on, we need to be a little bit more clear about what is an AI system. There are many uncertain features of the Act, right down to the fundamentals and to terms like substantial modification of an AI system, which makes a lot of difference, and to terms like located in the EU. Is that a person on a weekend in Calais, or is that a firm incorporated in the EU? Well, we're not sure. We're sure it's more than just firms that are incorporated in the EU, but located in the EU could mean a number of things. So there's a huge amount of uncertainty almost on every page of the Act. That's an anxiety factor. And then the complexity of what are called the value chain rules. So you can be a provider, a deployer, an importer, a distributor. And which of those you are makes a big difference to your obligations. And those roles are per legal entity, and you can play more than one role in any given legal entity. So I think many people in this room will be working for firms that have a footprint in the UK and a footprint in the EU. That's certainly my experience. I think you wouldn't be here unless you had an EU footprint somehow. That's complicated. So maybe you're a UK firm and you're providing an AI system which can be used by colleagues or customers in the EU. You might be a provider and a deployer. Your subsidiary or your customer might be a deployer or an importer or a distributor. So that complexity per legal entity and per person is a huge anxiety factor.
And so we see indeed that we're talking about something that is not exactly written as a playbook that people can implement straight away.
No.
What is the level of readiness? Like, do you see companies actually taking a grasp on that, or do you feel that they're measuring the urgency sufficiently?
So in financial services, the larger firms have programs. They're trying to prepare. And there are two sides to it for financial services. One is the Act was really written not for financial services. It was written for product manufacturers where they would have embedded AI. So air traffic control systems, air conditioning, tractors, radio equipment. And financial services was a bit of a bolt-on in the text. So it doesn't always fit that well. That's a problem. On the other hand, in financial services, we have a long history of regulated models, internal models with a lot of scrutiny from the regulators, mature model governance, model risk management, model inventory, which is a very good starting point. So that's a sort of readiness advantage. In other sectors, I think it's different, but I think highly regulated firms like pharmaceutical firms are in a similar position.
So let's use this as a transition. So Fabrice, you're working on advising companies on and doing work with them on a day-to-day basis on different types of governance principles. What's the starting point usually when you have a new piece of regulation like that arriving? What's the first thing that you need to do?
Yeah, I mean, what we see a lot is get the foundation in place really with the Act. So Amanda said definition is important. So in your organization, start defining, what is AI, what is Gen AI, what is a system, what is a model. It's important to have the common understanding and the level playing field. It's important as well to know what AI systems you are currently using, developing internally, getting from third parties, sometimes fourth parties. So have an inventory of AI system is quite crucial so that you don't have blind spots and you know what's going on in your organization. And then you can start with the assessment, if you like. And we mentioned that's a risk-based assessment. So we see in many organizations, there need to be a model tiering, a risk-based assessment approach. So in banking, we have already model tiering criteria. So it's about enhancing them. In other industries, about creating this risk-based assessment. But this is very important because the act, in essence, is risk-based, and you have to have a governance that is proportionate to the level of risk. And much broader, I would say, it's about the overall governance. Responsible AI, in a way, tackles a lot of the Act's requirements about having roles and responsibility well defined, about putting the right people around the table, so lawyers, compliance officers, developers, business representatives, etc., and have the right level of oversight. So I would say, in a sense, is have clarity, know what's going on with an inventory, embrace some of the key principles, and the risk-based assessment is one of the key principles of the Act. And it's around, not recreating the wheel, but defining some good and simple principle of governance.
If I may just double down on that, when you talk about inventory, what does it mean on a practical basis? You need to have a registry of all your AI systems, AI models?
Correct. And both. So you need the definition, you need a registry of what's going on. Sometimes if you use Dataiku, that's quite straightforward because you have them and it's well organized. But also you need to know what model you are sourcing from third party externally and bring them into your inventory. One of the key risks raised by regulator is about the third party models, third party systems. And sometimes third party will put a lot of AI, lots of Gen AI, existing third parties in their services, and you may not be aware of them. You may not be aware of the risk being taken. So that's about having this 360 view of all AI models and systems that will impact your operation or impact your business and your staff.
So we've been talking about the EU, and I don't think we are in the EU anymore, if I understood well what happened in the past few years. So we've talked about it. There's an extraterritorially, I will not manage to say that word. There's a question of who's going to be concerned by the EU Act, depending upon the location of the activities. But before we rediscuss that, Amanda, what's happening in the UK today? Is there a chance that something similar is going to happen? How do you see the landscape evolving from a legal standpoint?
Yeah, so extraterritorial is not one of my favorite words.
See, I'm not the only one. That's good to know.
Words either. But in the UK has adopted a sector approach, quite different from the EU Act. But within the UK also needs to comply. So what extraterritorial reach means, so kind of demystifying the term. So it's a law or regulation that applies to actions, entities, or individuals outside of the jurisdiction or country that it's enacted. This was also why there is a lot of anxiety about GDPR, because same kind of principles apply. So if you're selling or deploying AI in the EU, or if your servers are outside the EU, so let's say your servers are in Japan, for example, you still need to comply. And this is why it's really important that all organizations start preparing and having a really strong idea of where their data is being transferred, what if their systems are using generative AI or traditional AI. And this also speaks to the AI literacy piece that's contained within the regulation, where it's becoming mandated for people to be upskilled and have AI literacy training.
And if I understand well, looking a little bit at the landscape, in the UK, there's been more of a principles-based approach for the time being. Do you see this staying as is? Do you see it potentially evolving towards more of a constraint-based approach?
I see it evolving, and I believe that the different sectors, whether it's insurance or financial services, will work very closely with the key stakeholders and develop more particular rules. If you think about in highly regulated sectors, algorithmic transparency is very important. You need to know how a decision was reached. So in the context of generative AI, a common issue is hallucinations and not understanding how a decision was made. For that reason, I think the sector-based approach is going to be very important in order to focus on algorithmic transparency and how a decision is made. And I believe that will be embedded into the different frameworks.
Barry, anything to add on your side?
Yeah. So the the UK government's principles-based approach, actually it's very similar to the principles underlying the EU AI Act. Both approaches are driven by essentially the same principles of transparency, fairness, robustness, and so on. So there's a lot of congruence there. But in the UK, in April, regulators, both sectoral and cross-sectoral regulators, were asked in April to say whether they thought their existing powers, legal powers, regulatory powers, were adequate. By and large, they said yes, which didn't seem to indicate, rules-based changes in most areas of the UK economy. I think, now here I'm going out on a limb and guessing, but I think that won't change significantly with the new government. What might happen is there might be regulations that bind big tech, especially Gen AI providers, to improve their protection for IP, transparency, and the CME, the Competition and Markets Authority, is a little bit concerned about concentration risk, about penetration of the market, which leads to, for example, market pricing power and competition issues. So there might be rules about that more than about details that individual pharma companies, distribution companies, logistics companies, or banks. I don't think that's going to happen.
So if I have to summarize in any case for people in this room, the reason why we're talking about the EU Act today is that there will be some implications on many companies operating in the UK simply because of the word, I won't say factor, extraterritoriality. That's really tough to say. Factor, but there's also going to be, in any case, also a cross-pollination between all the principles emerging in the UK that could be transversal, but also sectorial specific in the activities. So as I was saying in my introduction, 5 years ago, most of the focus was on responsible AI. And I'm not saying responsible AI has faded away, but I've always found in my conversations that there are those companies that completely embrace it and make it like almost of a branding topic. They put responsible AI as part of their activities. And then for the rest, there was a bit too much of a cross-pollination, whether it was ethical-based, et cetera, et cetera. Do we actually, with the EU Act and these move towards regulations, have a proper opportunity to turn these ethical considerations into practical operations? Like, Fabrice, do you want to take this?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the EU Act is a good catalyst to do AI properly, right? Because it set very clear principle and clear set of rules, or we hope they will be clear, but all the foundational activities we talk about, inventory, around risk-based assessment, around continuous monitoring, around roles and responsibilities, around proper governance setup, I think are quite practical, are quite good practice along the way as well. So I think that's a good opportunity, and that will strengthen transparency, that will strengthen ownership as well in organizations, strengthen literacy. So in a way, I mean, for me, it's not new, right? It's a catalyst of good governance principle, and it helps to bring a lot of attention to that, a lot of focus.
And so do you see companies asking themselves questions they hadn't really asked themselves before?
Yeah, I mean, we see questions around, it's a lot of questions around how do we do that in a way. And we see a lot of organizations which were very siloed in a way, data risk looking after data, model risk looking after model, technology being not linked to data or to model, conduct being, not linked to the full narrative. I think now it's really a push to put everyone around the table. And everyone from the development team, from the business teams, from the second line and risk team, from the model risk team in banking and other industries, and involving their third-party providers as well. So it's not only inward looking, it's outwards looking as well. So I think the big shift is twofold. One is this collaboration within organization and with the ecosystem. And the second shift is it goes much higher on the executive and board radar now, because there is a regulation. So board really have that and look at their risk appetite and look at doing the right things. And CEO and executive team also push for a good governance of AI.
Barry, on your side, you were explaining that you have been advising companies on responsible AI for a while. So do you see this as a good catalyst to unlock that topic and put it really in the operational on the
It has
operational
been,
side of the
So,
house? Yeah.
so 5 years ago, when I was saying to senior management, you need to think about AI and data ethics, you might even consider an ethics panel.
Yeah.
No, let's talk about compliance. Ethics is a nice-to-have overlay. Now they listen. On the one hand, they're very enthusiastic about getting the value out of AI, and especially generative AI. But now they see that, that they need to comply, but compliance means you've got to implement an ethics-based framework. So now they see ethics is not a nice-to-have overlay, it's actually part of the substance of the regulatory environment. And that's true in the UK and in the EU.
Yeah, so ethics suddenly become a proper part of your AI
Yes.
strategy versus being something that is done
Exactly.
on the side.
Yeah.
So it's going to be shortly time to wrap up. Amanda, I have a question for you. Before, I have a question for the audience. Who interacts with lawyers on a day-to-day basis? A few people, okay. But that's not usually the majority of the people working on a day-to-day basis on AI and data. I think with these regulatory changes, interacting with risk people, interacting with compliance people, interacting with legal people, which are all different types of specialties, is going to become more part of the day-to-day of people working in data. What's your advice on that? Like, how do you think, if I switch the question around, do you think lawyers are ready to have the right conversations with AI specialists?
I don't think they have a choice, but I do think it is really exciting that you have all these different subject matter experts come together. If you look at some of the most interesting fine-tuned large language models, for example, there's a medical model that helps provide preliminary assessments. It's doctors and developers and machine learning engineers who come together. So similar to the AI Act, you're going to have AI governance professionals, you're going to have lawyers in policy. But my advice would be to work together to translate technical requirements into regulatory requirements and vice versa. There's a concept in contract law called the meeting of the minds. So when two or more parties come to a mutual understanding of the terms of a contract, I think the same thing is going to have to apply for the EU AI Act. And there's going to be things such as AI dictionaries. I'm not saying to educate lawyers on vectorization or reg, but to have a strong understanding of what's traditional AI, generative AI, what's fine-tuning, and also do the same for translating legal and regulatory requirements. There's a saying that I love. It says IA enables AI, so information architecture enables artificial intelligence, and I think that is part of the Act as well. So once you have an idea of your full information architecture, you can map the risks, map the data transfers, and map the requirements. You can really enable AI, and that's part of the objective of the Act, for people to have a better trust and foundation to really democratize AI, because how can you understand something that you don't trust?
Felix, so on your side, what are the right people that need to be put around the table to get started with gaining into that understanding? Because there is going to be serious work to be done.
Yep.
And Amanda, you have that deep knowledge on your side, but I'm pretty sure there's going to be some gap bridging to organize.
Yeah, I think the important is to cover all grounds. So you need people developing AI, you need people pushing AI in the business, you need your risk team, you need your model risk team, you need your lawyers, conduct teams as well, you need people from the executive teams. So I think the point is really collaboration within organization and collaboration with third party as well.
Barry, on your side, you just a few words of conclusion. What would be the takeaway if you have like 2-3 tips to share with the audience?
So I was keeping notes. I got half a dozen bullet points, but let's see how far I get through that. So I think some of the points that were made, you've got to get the foundations right. You've got to understand organizationally, what is AI, what is generative AI, what's an AI system, what's a model. You've got to have an inventory, which is, I think, probably more sophisticated than our model risk inventories were in the past. You need to make sure you're bringing in third-party products, including third-party products that have embedded AI, and the big tech models, large language models, generative AI models. You need to take a risk-based approach, but you also need to retain flexibility, especially with the EU AI Act. it will unfold over time. It's not all done and dusted. There's a whole raft of standards that Senelec, which is the EU standards authority in this case, will be publishing. Guidance from the AI office, secondary legislation. So things will clarify. All these uncertainties in the Act will unfold over time, which means a risk-based and a flexible approach is needed. But at the same time, you've got to keep your eye on the deadlines, because you can't wait for every piece of guidance. You need to start making some judgments, get the ball rolling, get your tool set in place. And then I think what we've all been saying is you need a cross-organizational approach. You need to bring in data management, data scientists, modelers, technologists, and even the lawyers all around the table.
Joint risk assessments.
So thanks a lot for this panel, very enriching. I did learn a number of things that I wasn't aware of before. Just maybe to wrap things up on my side, I don't think that most of the people around, and starting with myself, it's very rare where you see a new regulation and you're like, hey, cool, fun project getting started. It's not going to be the easiest one. Everyone will have to go and look at it for sure. I would say, though, that within our customers, we have seen a really good correlation between those who have defined governance and who have managed to scale. Because governance also gives us an opportunity to define what's acceptable and not acceptable, what is the framework to move forward. So there will be a potential slowdown, at least initially. I do see that over time for the companies that embrace it, it will accelerate things beyond. There is, though, a very big risk of slowdown for organizations that will not embrace that change. The good news is that we have an opportunity to actually crack it all together. So I do, hope to see you all next year on that stage with, instead of us presenting and explaining what this is going to be about, actually some of you saying what they're doing today on that topic. Thanks a lot for your time. And, well, if you have some questions, don't hesitate to come. Thanks.